So, welcome everybody to the Cloud Solutions for Support Agency Missions panel. Federal agencies are shifting away from legacy IT systems to the cloud, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all model. Some agencies want infrastructure as a code, infrastructure cloud models. Some prefer platforms as a service models, while still others may need software as a service models to meet agency-specific needs. Today, we're going to hear from agency IT leaders about the cloud solutions they're adopting to ensure maximum efficiency while streamlining operations. Please welcome to the panel Beth Capello, Deputy CIO, DHS, Mr. Jeff Chancellor, Principal Systems Engineer, who brings an industry perspective from Software AG, George Linares, CTO, CMS, and Sharon Woods, Executive Director of the Cloud Computing Program Office at DISA. And I'll be moderating the panel. My name's Andrew Underhill, and I'm the VP of Government CIO. So, welcome everybody. I'm going to kick off with a group question to everybody. Maybe we can just take it in turns to answer. Now, starting with you, George, can you discuss what types of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service capabilities you've explored in your agency? And what benefits and disadvantages do you see to each based on your agency mission needs?
So at CMS, we've learned a lot in terms of the cloud sort of power and infrastructure offerings and services they have. It's one environment that it moves so quickly. As everybody probably knows, the cloud releases new services all the time. So CMS is trying to sort of create a balance between the platforms, the infrastructures that takes advantage of, right? Keeping in mind, what is it that the business, the mission of the agency is, and how can we serve that better? From that perspective, we're trying to be as flexible, open, and really try to not go with one direction or the other, but really try to be very thoughtful around what's truly needed in terms of the cloud services, right? Obviously, the cloud paradigm adds a little bit, it shifts sort of like the amount of work, right, that the system developers, the system owners sort of inherit, right? In the old paradigm of on-prem, there was an operations data center. They will provide all those different things, services that were around the infrastructure. In a new paradigm, the developers, the system maintainers, and the owners sort of inherit that. So there's a lot of complexity and learning curve in terms of that, right? The benefits are that you have a lot of resiliency. It's quicker. Infrastructure as code has changed how we deploy applications, right? The same code is valid in all the environments. You can deploy much quicker into a production environment, but there is a learning. The larger the portfolio of systems you have in the cloud, the more complexity you have now.
Thank you, George. Beth or Sharon, would you like to go next?
I can jump in. So, as I'm sure you know, Department of Defense is this multi-vendor, multi-cloud environment. And I think with time, as we've started to understand what you get at different layers in that cloud stack, that it's not just cloud, right? You have that infrastructure platform and then software as a service layer. There's more maturity in what do you need? And with that comes what kind of technical competency do you have to operate at those different layers? So if your need is storage, when you look at a combatant command and they have all these wartime records that have to be maintained for decades, just basic cold storage, it can be a game changer. Conversely, especially if you don't have enormous technical talent, but there's just this need for users to be able to communicate, collaborate, a lot of kind of things already done for them. It's where software as a service becomes key, where you're not having to engineer things at the platform and infrastructure layer. You're really able to rely on the vendor's know-how to deliver what you need and continue to keep pace with where the technology is. We're still learning a lot about how to consume at the different layers. And I think an area where there's been a lot of learning is that platform layer of how do you take it up a level from infrastructure. So you want a level of control, especially if you have custom built applications or things that you're developing yourself. But SaaS just doesn't offer the level of control that you need over meeting the requirements. I think that that's an area and the earlier panelist, George, mentioning infrastructure as code is just a really interesting proposition on how you get the most out of cloud, depending on the area, the level of the stack that you're at.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And we've all heard a lot about Platform One from our colleague Nick Chalon recently. Beth, from your perspective.
So, DHS is I think a really interesting federal agency. Not only are we enormous, right? We're the third largest civilian federal agency, but our mission sets are highly disparate, right? From trade and travel facilitation to law enforcement to responding to natural disasters. And so when I think about the benefits and what we're looking for with cloud adoption, I'm thinking about delivery at the speed of mission, right? And performance and capacity management, and all of those things that improve both our resilience, which I think George mentioned, but critically our responsiveness. And I can think of a couple of sort of pointed examples right now. We've obviously all been managing through the pandemic over the last almost year, which is a little frightening to think about. And there are a number of aspects to that when you think about meeting your mission, right? It's supporting a remote workforce. And obviously, cloud enabled those capabilities in ways that we had not considered in our continuity of operations planning, right? I think that we got very lucky in some ways because we had accelerated cloud adoption for some things like, I think I've talked about in the past in other venues, the email adoption piece, right? And those collaboration tools that were in the cloud allowed DHS to flip from 10,000 users a day working remotely to 70,000 overnight without missing a beat. And that's a very small example of where we found cloud adoption really has supported and enhanced the mission. I think additionally, when you look at mission sets from, say, a CBP to an immigration and customs enforcement to citizenship and immigration services, there are overlaps between those mission sets or handoffs, and cloud adoption really facilitates that data and information sharing. It makes us, again, more efficient and more effective at serving the mission. So there are a lot of very specific examples I could talk about, but in terms of context of where it's infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or the variety of service offerings, within DHS, I think we're using all of them, and it's certainly specific to the mission set. And frankly, we're still going to have on-prem services as well. So I think when you're looking at your overall strategy for cloud adoption, you have to be mindful of meeting the mission first. Thank you.
So thank you, Beth. So you mentioned multiple components there. What is it like coordinating to ensure visibility, consistency, and interoperability across the whole department?
It's an awful lot of fun, and it's great when we get to go up in front of the congressman and talk about our FITARA scores, because the DHS CIO is ultimately responsible for managing the security and the efficiency of IT spend across the department. So when we do have these incredibly disparate mission sets, and our components have their own appropriated dollars that they certainly spend as needed to meet their mission. We have a couple of different mechanisms that we use, but most recently we stood up about a year ago our Network Operations Security Center, which is really bringing together sort of Tier 1 and Tier 2 Network Operations Center and Security Operations Center management options. And one of the tenets of that organization is to have visibility into what's going on down in the component organizations. While the component NOCs are managing their environments, right, including their cloud platforms, we need to have visibility. And so we've put some mechanisms in place, tools and procedures to get enhanced visibility into the platforms. But I do think that's an area for exploration and development and growth, right? We're learning how to do this efficiently and effectively. it's not just managing those platforms in terms of a pure operational, keep it up and running perspective, but also from a security perspective and from an efficiency and effectiveness of IT spend perspective, right? Which are all things that the DHS CIO has got to be concerned about. So I think we've made some progress, really great progress, frankly, this past year, but certainly an area that we're looking to continue to improve and enhance as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. And what role does DevSecOps play in cloud adoption at DHS? And how does DHS think about security in that cloud infrastructure?
So for anybody that's heard me speak about this, at DHS, it's Sec DevOps, because we are the Department of Homeland Security and security comes first. And I say that with a big smile, but I'm quite serious about it. If, you know, there has been a lot of conversation about what's going on in the enterprise right now with the recent breach. But, you know, these are things we're concerned about all the time. And we certainly are looking at the best ways to manage our security environment as we, you know, go to enhance cloud adoption. And I think we've had a couple of initiatives this past year with the Zero Trust architecture. I've also had the CTO team working on developing some very specific security target architectures that could then be shared throughout the department. Because one of the things that we have the benefit of with being a very large and disparate organization is there are best practices that are developed within the components. And we've got amazing IT talent across the enterprise. So one of the things that we're doing up at the DHS CIO office is trying to bring together those best practices, specifically in the area of security, and share them throughout the department. And our Sec DevOps initiative is focusing on that right now.
Okay, great. That sounds fantastic. Sharing best practices is something that I think we all aspire to, but it's not done very well. History has shown us that. So a question for Beth and George now. Since DHS and CMS both collect a lot of potentially sensitive data for American citizens and or immigrants, how does DHS work with cloud providers to ensure that information is protected and private if it's stored on shared service environments?
I guess I can start. I think something the Beth said around DevSecOps or SecDevOps. I mean, security is key, right? One of the initiatives that we're trying to do, which the cloud has sort of afforded us to do, is we're trying to do the automation of those security controls, right? In the past, everything has been very paper-driven, and we're finding there's new technologies out there, which we can sort of move security to the very beginning. By securing is checking the configuration, the things that happen at the infrastructure level. And we call that moving that to the left, right? Empower those developers to have access to that security at the very beginning as they develop. Don't wait like through the normal, or we used to do in the authority to operate process before you go to production, you do all these checks. We want to do at the very onset, have those powerful tools in place that are somehow automatically check things, right? And make that part of sort of if the pipeline of building this new system, this new capability, whatever that may be, and is constantly sort of checking for every release. As we know, Agile is sort of throwing that in place now, where now deployments happen weekly, every 2 weeks, you know, as need-based, based on the need of the business and the changes that happen. So when it comes to data, right, we're trying to sort of incorporate some of the same principles around that. One of the things that also the new technology is allowing us to do is how can we sort of take advantage of the cloud where you store the data once, right? But you can be accessed by multiple parties. In the past, technology was a big constraint for us because you were really constrained to the physical server, the capability, how much CPU, memory, and so forth. In the cloud, you can sort of create each consumer, right? You have their own compute, right? Their own power, CPU power, if you will, and to consume the data as much as they want to based on their need without affecting anybody else that may be next to them. So we are moving in that direction. We just started, we're learning a lot. How can we sort of protect? We have high sensitive data that is considered high. How do we create security around that and put some tools that will allow us to have that fine grain authorization, right? Where the business, the owner of that data can have a a saying on approving who has access to the data, because it becomes, as we all know, as federal agencies, we all get audited, and we got to be able to provide a sort of a trail of who accessed data, who requested the data. So having that, freeing the data is great, but we got to have processes and controls in place that can sort of provide that proof and audit, so we can show that we are secure, that yes, the data is being used in a context that it is going to serve the business of the agency, right? So those are the couple of things. And
thank you, George. Beth, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm probably repeating myself a little bit here, but I mentioned with our Sec DevOps campaign that we're starting with some very specific security target architectures, and the Zero Trust initiative that's been underway. I think we've had about 7 specific use cases this past year, because we're taking an incremental approach rather than a big bang theory with Zero Trust. And when I think about securing the data and ensuring privacy, because I think that's really a part of this is the privacy aspects of it. I'm looking at ways that we can leverage the Zero Trust architecture to enhance that environment. Now, I do think there are other security measures with identity management and access control pieces that are going to feed into this, and they're going to be supporting elements. But I think where my head is at right now is going starting from the standpoint of there is no trust, right? And that's sort of fundamentally what Zero Trust is about, and ensuring that we are putting the necessary controls around the data in a way that doesn't get in the way of the operations, but certainly is mindful of the, from mistakes to adversaries that would want to access DHS data, and trust me, there are an awful lot of them, that we are putting all the necessary controls in place to limit that to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Beth. I think it's a good place to bring Sharon back into the conversation if I can. I have a question here for you relating to the security, and it's how are you handling the different security needs for the different as a service applications that you have?
To be honest, we're still learning about that. So right now, the department and CCPO, we rolled out the CVR environment, right? So that's a separate story, but that was the O365 environment that we rolled out in less than 30 days for the entire department. But what's really happening right now is the transition to the enduring O365 environments that are at the higher security level. So there's the technical implementation of getting that in place. But then, as you said, right, there are these super important security considerations, and we're still learning how to operate in that place. I think one of the key pieces of it is the identity and authentication part. You have to be able to follow a persona across the department. And, we have over 10 O365 tenants that we're in the process of federating right now. So CCPO, one of the things we did was develop a cloud-based centralized identity solution that also achieves authentication, but it's cloud-based. It works in tandem with the department's existing identity solutions, and it's a repository. So the service tenants can go in and pull things down, and they're still able to retain control and decide who's authorized to go in their environment. But you can imagine a situation where you have somebody that's in the Navy and they get deployed to PACOM, and then they go to joint staff, and they get sent around, and that's where we have, one person with 4 different emails, and it's a disaster. How do you achieve end-to-end security in an environment where you may have a significant security issue in one tenant related to a persona that perhaps has been hijacked? And that could very well translate into the other tenants. But if you have no means of tracking the identity, and mapping that, you have no idea that that's the same person, and you have no way, but for like manual data calls to go figure out what's going on there. So some of that is right, and that's the whole, whether it's DevSecOps, Sec DevOps, baking that into the front end of let's get that identity and authentication solution there in the beginning and have that be the basis for the federation as more and more users are rolling into productions across the different tenants. And so now you have this powerful capability of tracking existing personas. And then on top of that, being able to layer on the commercial vendor security tools for analysis, many of which are based on artificial intelligence. And they continue to refine those to make those better and better so that you have this automated ability to look at and identify potential security issues and then dig deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. So I think that's a chance for Jeff to give an industry perspective now that you've mentioned those commercial tools. But I really wanted to ask you what other as a service capabilities are you looking at to support the DoD mission? Because, you know, identity and access management is one of the core services, maybe the obvious one to do first. But what other services are you looking at?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a number of services, right? And these become these kind of enterprise consumption services, whether you're looking at something like Salesforce you know, you're looking at different collaboration suites. So, of course, there's O365. That's certainly not the only one. I think right now the department is, I don't want to say trialing because they're being used at production scale, but they're in within disparate, you know, pieces of the environment, and probably not too dissimilar from DHS, where you have all the different services and then the DoD components within that. You know, they're testing out different SaaS applications to meet their mission needs. But the reality with the Department of Defense is that there is this stream that cuts across all the services that is consistent. And so you don't need to have, you know, multiple different instantiations of Salesforce to, you know, achieve a particular capability, but we do, because we're learning and the services we're learning at different times. And so the real conundrum with any of the SaaS offerings is how do you deploy that at scale? And maybe that's just a bridge too far for certain things. And you say, okay, this meets the mission of this particular service, and that's good enough. But for certain things, collaboration tools being a key example, that's not good enough. You know, we have to have a joint force. Joint force means communicating across the entire department.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, privacy has always been an issue. You know, I come from the health IT background, and interoperability and privacy don't necessarily go well together. So Jeff, from an industry perspective, in your experience, what are you seeing to help with interoperability, you know, that challenge, and how are you helping organizations overcoming the security problems that we've been discussing?
You know, one of the things that we hear as a central sort of theme is that the collaboration, the way we collaborate now has had to change, and we have gotten very proficient at sitting here in our, you know, home offices and our home suites, having that same sort of feel that we are talking, you know, face to face with our team. I feel very comfortable with it now. We all know that Zoom is now a verb, just like Google took over the verbs. But Software AG has been providing interoperability solutions and data integration solutions since the mainframe came online. So we have experience with that integration. And we also take at heart the security needs and the protection of that data as it moves across the enterprise. And certainly our products continue to evolve with the modern cloud-based transformations, as well as moving stuff to the cloud. So our products have to be able to run on that cloud the same way it does on-prem, provide the same security controls and so forth. The other thing that we're doing and helping with our customers is we're providing solutions to help the planning stages and the discussions around what are your intentions and what are your plans. And those discussions have to have access to the requirements for security, as Sharon and Beth and George have alluded to, is that you can't ignore those types of conversations, and you got to have access to that planning data. So we provide platform as a service for planning and strategic planning for all those migrations that are being contemplated, and the ones that are already there, a way to ensure that that integration to those cloud-based solutions from a hybrid scenario works just as well. So we've been very active in that, keeping our products up to date and advising our customers with that sort of capabilities.
So thank you, Jeff. You know, I remember Software AG, that you were key to one of the big service buses up in Canada, and the health exchange system up there years ago. So you guys done some great things in the past. future-wise, where do you see the major growth areas going forward?
Well, the data integration space has been prevalent for a while, but now we talk and about these new technologies such as IoT. IoT just brings a whole new realm of data integration from very small types of devices, but millions and millions of devices. And so using our backbone of our web methods integration platform, we've got to be able to move that data securely from all of these devices that are coming up and blend that sort of device collaboration, making sure that they can talk to each other, but also putting that information of to the decision makers' hands of what are we doing with this? Are we capturing too much? Are we capturing just right? How can we scale, adding a lot more devices and so forth. So we're pretty much right there looking at future technologies, making sure that we have opportunities to put those into the conversations and sort of guide the conversations to how to adopt, how to transform, how to move, and leverage all these cloud services. And IoT is just now getting into the mix in mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we're experiencing an age now where it's never been easier to adopt new technologies and innovations on scale, right? George, maybe you could talk a little bit about how CMS is working with cloud providers to, develop that relationship with industry and innovators, because it is important to the success of cloud at CMS.
Yes, I mean, so industry, obviously, at CMS, we do contract out most of the work. I would say a high percentage, probably in the 90s somewhere. And so industry becomes very important to us, and we try to share as much as we can with them, right? One of the things that it's important, as all these federal agencies have been saying here, as yes, we're multi-cloud, but the interconnectivity between those clouds and the on-prem systems and everything becomes critical, right? So sometimes working with industry, we want them to understand that interoperability, interconnectivity becomes critical, right? Systems can live, whether it's a SaaS, whether it's in one cloud, cloud A, cloud B, government-only cloud. That becomes really not as important as being able to connect. Because at the end of the day, I know more likely the other federal agencies are the same way. All of our programs need the data of other programs, right? There is some level of overlapping in terms of, for the mission itself. So being to have that connectivity becomes key. So we do try to sort of share as much with industry. We have a number of forums that we do and try to let them know ahead, right? Because we wanted to see CMS is going in this direction, whether it's in a storage state, whether it's in a database, whether it's in security, understand. So what we want is really innovation to come in, new ideas. We're trying to be, to the degree that we can, as technology agnostic, right? Especially when it comes to software development. Obviously, when it comes to security monitoring, network, there's some, some things where we are sort of as target software that we're using and implementing. But when it comes to developing, mission sort of related systems, we're trying to be as open as possible. And we find that approach has worked for us because industry is bringing new ideas, and we want that. We don't know everything. We're still learning. I think that's the one word I think has been sort of repeated multiple times, learning. But we're open to that learning. And we're trying to create a culture within our sort of agency to be open to the technologies. And we're learning more and more that sometimes technology itself is not the problem, but it's how do we adapt that within the ecosystem that is already in place to be sure that it's secure, right? And that the business is able to utilize it in a way that it benefits their programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, George. So I'm going to shift topic a little bit and bring Sharon back into the conversation if we can, and talk pandemic. How has the pandemic, changed the way you're operating? How have you managed the sudden shift to cloud? Maybe you can talk to some of the initiatives that you've had to deal with over the last 12 months.
Sure. So, when the pandemic first happened, I think every federal agency had to somehow accommodate a near 100% virtual workforce. I think for the Department of Defense, the other piece of this was preserving military readiness, also knowing that those similar circumstances existed. So fundamentally, collaboration just broke in that kind of environment. And so CCPO, with CIO's endorsement and the services, deployed the commercial virtual remote environment. So it's an O365 environment that we designed and deployed in less than 30 days. How did that happen, right? I mean, we achieved something in 30 days that oftentimes takes years to do because it mattered. Leadership at the highest level just stood up and said, this has to get done. But it was more than that. They really followed through. One good example is, so within the first 7 days of starting the effort and standing up the initial tenant, we had pilot users. You know who all those pilot users were? They were SES and general and flag officers that were in there completely eating their own dog food. Now, I will say the number of VIP phone calls we got about, hey, this isn't working. And we had plenty of continuous user feedback that we capitalized on. But it really made a difference. And the other thing, and I think this is still, right, this is a massive cultural adjustment, is implementing authentic agile. MVP, and this was the case with CVR, it hurts. MVP is painful because it doesn't include all the functionality you want. It includes the bare minimum functionality in order to have something that is a starting place. And so it is missing things that you really want. And with CVR, within the context of the pandemic, I think the department was willing to accept that because we had nothing. And then from there, you had this constant feedback. So just the simple user guide on how to get on board was updated every night for probably, maybe 1 to 2 weeks. And under a traditional paradigm, that would have been a failure. That would have been why didn't the team plan this all out enough so that you knew exactly and predicted with your magic ball everything that the user needed? That's not agile. Agile is, let me get something out there that I accept is already not what it needs to be. I'm going to get user feedback, which we were getting every day. And that's why every night we were updating it. We'd send it back out. We'd get more feedback, send it back out. But, we had 3.2 million accounts, and now we have, over 1 million active accounts. So there was no shortage of user feedback. But those lessons, which I think, the department onboarded because of the pandemic, it's really hard to translate that still into other efforts. So even with the enduring O365 solutions, it's really hard to not revert back to, well, we want everything right out of the gate. And it doesn't work like that if you're really getting speed to capability, which, the pandemic showed us that we can achieve speed to capability. We can do something in 30 days that's never been done in the world. It's the largest O365 tenant in the world. But then, enough time passes and it's just really hard to not revert back to that traditional mindset. And so that's just a constant tension there that we continue to push on because we do have that fresh point of reference with CVR and other capabilities, particularly in the classified sphere that the department rolled out in order to preserve and maintain force readiness.
I think it's important that what I heard is that, we are adapting to these new ways of doing things, but we got to be able to capture that knowledge, capture those best practices, and have them readily accessible so that we can repeat and learn from them, continue to tweak them, and not have it interrupt our daily lives, but a place to capture that knowledge in a knowledge repository is a key thing for us as here at Software AG.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I think that leads on, to a group question I have is, how do we balance the program needs with technological advancements? And I think, obviously something like the pandemic forces us to do that. But ordinarily, what approaches have we taken? I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I will venture to say that one of the things that the culture, at least from the leadership perspective, right? Because I think Sharon was right. I mean, there has to be that support, right? The leaders of the agency got to be supportive of what's happening and being as transparent, because even though, I mean, for us, it was the same thing. We have Zoom within the agency. I mean, after at first it was a little bit, I mean, we had already started the pilot kind of, we just got lucky in that aspect, but it was the same thing, learning curve. Now there was no guides or anything like that. But working with the leadership and sort of, creating this, new environment of, we're trying to share with you what we know, what we have. It's learning and working with you. We need your support. It made a big difference for us. And now it's become really that, that de facto go-to, maybe, Zoom in changing everything else that we've done, and that we're growing more and more. I think is taking those lessons, right? Because out of sometimes chaos, there are some good things that come out of it, right? So it's like having those leaders that work with you and looking at it from that lens and say, yes, what else can we do? What is the next thing, right? Because at some point, we're going to go back to work. Maybe it'll change. The world has changed, obviously. But how do we sort of keep the level of interaction and engagement or the workforce in the way that whether you're at the building on-prem or you're remote, you can still sort of interact and work in the same way? So what other toolings, collaboration toolings that are needed in order to make that experience that much more engaging becomes important too.
So I just want to jump in with two things. First of all, Sharon, congratulations on what you accomplished. That is just amazing, and getting it done in under the circumstances that you were operating in, just absolutely amazing. And I want to key in on something you said about you had leadership buy-in, and I had to chuckle a lot about the fact that your first user feedback was coming from your VIPs, from your SESs, and from your, I'm guessing, some flag officers thrown in. Not a population that has opinions on anything, actually. Again, kudos to you. But I think what's really important to grab a hold of out of that is you demonstrated capability, right? And you demonstrated an agile methodology in a way that met an overwhelming event. Now, I think what I think I heard you say was, okay, how do I get that sort of incorporated, that agile methodology and that agile acceptance into normal business practice? And I think that's something we've all been struggling with. I don't know about you, but at least from my perspective, in how you get the procurement officials and acquisition officials to sort of understand agile, right? And how we do this going forward. It's very different, right? It's a very different model. We're not telling you everything up front. We're gonna kind of make this up as we go along, and that's really uncomfortable for, at least in my experience, folks that are long-term government employees. So I think that's an area for exploration for all of us, right? Is how do we take these things that we managed to accomplish, leveraging this horrible event, right? But then turn that into a benefit long-term in getting our own leadership buy-in for these best practices, whether it's agile, whether it's sec DevOps, whatever the case may be, and making sure that we can continue that work. But again, I just wanted to say congratulations on your accomplishments. These are really amazing.
I think we see some of the solutions out there from our perspective is that we not only have Zoom, we have Teams, we have GoTo, and what we've found is that the behavior's the same. We might get aggravated with the technologies and so forth, but we as a society are now comfortable in this sort of collaboration mechanism. What we have to do then is now bring the data to the Zoom, to the collaboration easier and with purpose to continue to make decisions, because it's not standing still. Our jobs are not standing still. We have to be mindful of security all the way through, but from our operational heritage, moving operational data throughout the enterprises to now our planning heritage, with helping make better decisions for the future state, including all this transformation and the tools. We're right there offering our solutions. We're right there trying to collaborate with our customers and follow in line with the standards bodies for delivering truly enterprise software.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff. No, unfortunately, yeah, we are out of time. It was interesting as we were talking. I was thinking, well, should we have an identity and access management system here to make sure that Jeff, you're not a computer-generated image that's talking here, and you are really Jeff, Chancellor. Anyhow, I want to thank everybody for joining this session. It's been great, very insightful, and there's going to be a short introductory video for the next panel.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you,
everybody.
Andrew.